This is an interview of Suzie Simpson, conducted on November 24th, 2008 at 5:51 p.m. at Stonewall on High Street in Columbus, Ohio. If we could just start with your ethnic or racial background.
Caucasian.
Okay. And if you're open to it, would you give me your birth date?
Yep, 9/12/49.
Can you tell me a little bit about your parents?
I grew up in a small town in southeastern Ohio, and my parents had a little grocery store, gas station, restaurant combination out in the country.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any siblings?
I do have an older and a younger sister.
And what are their names?
Alana and Becky.
Which one's older?
Alana's older.
Okay.
I'm the poor second child. We've always been mistreated.
So both your parents worked in the restaurant?
Yeah. My dad also drove the school bus and sold insurance on the side.
Okay.
They were hard workers.
Maybe you can tell me a little bit about holidays, family vacations, any type of special occasions you had with your family when you were younger.
We used to take vacations once a year. We would go, I think it was Geneva Lake or Chippewa Lake, somewhere in Ohio. Mm-hmm. Because we owned our own place, so my parents took very few days off of the year, but our house was right beside the restaurant, so they were always there.
Okay. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about your adolescent years. Where did you go to high school? What was that like for you?
I went to Lakeland High School in Freeport, graduated with 34 people. It was out in the country. I always felt like there was something else, somewhere else I wanted to be. Mm-hmm. Not that it wasn't pretty there and the people were nice, but I wanted to get out and wanted more in life that wasn't offering me. And it was a very gossipy little town too, so everybody knew everything about everybody, or thought they did.
When did you come out?
I did not come out till I was in college, Ohio State.
Okay. And you said your town was very gossipy. Was that something that you found when you came out, or?
I didn't come out there, and actually have not spent much time there except to go visit my parents. And they live with my sister now up in Kent, so they're okay. My family is fine with who I am now. Okay. But it was a struggle for a while because I grew up in such a small town, and my younger sister actually sent me a letter saying that she knew I was gay because my older sister had told her. And that she didn't think I should tell Mom and Dad because they wouldn't understand, and that Mom had seen a show on TV where the gay person had one earring on one side and two on the other, and I happened to have that, and she started crying when I left one time. And so I didn't talk about it with them for a long time, which I think was a mistake because I think they would have understood a lot sooner than when we finally did.
When did you talk to them?
I think it was when I started taking folks home with me, and but they pretty much were, we love you for who you are, and a lot of times they wouldn't talk about anything really personal. It would be about maybe something they saw on TV or this or that. But just recently, when we were talking about Proposition 8, and my mom said, well, I never would have understood why that was even important until you told me about Susan and Bootsy, who was a friend of mine who got sick. And when I explained the things that might happen, she was like, oh, that's not right. Which I think is what really makes a difference with people changing their mind, is if they hear a personal story or something that's real to them and not shouting and noise. And although that's important too, but
maybe you could tell me a little bit about some organizations you've been a part of.
Tax my memory. We used to change the name of them about every other year. Let's see, we had Gay Women Suffonsified. We were Gay Women's Association, I believe. Most of them were affiliated, started out through Ohio State. And then we formed some other community groups later. And then there were several of us who then started Women Against Rape. And then there was a women's community collective that had a whole bunch of groups under it. We had a health group and a mechanics group and whatever we could come up with, so that we were having a meeting every night of the week, and not getting any of the groups very far along, but they all existed. It was different times back then. And it was the Indochina Peace campaign. Vietnam War was going on, and at least from my perspective, the lesbian movement came to the forefront and visible because of the anti-war movement, because people knew faggots and whatever, but they never really knew lesbians existed or talked about it. So I can remember we would do our guerrilla theater things and walk down High Street holding hands or do stuff just to get a reaction, because people really never talked about it back then. And a lot of the men, even that were in the anti-war movement and the radical movements, were still very sexist. So I think the women kind of had to take charge of themselves and their own lives through the women's liberation, and then I think through that the gay women kind of emerged. It was funny, I was at a memorial last night for a woman I'd known back then, and this guy gave me a tape of I was also in a band, and they had a community bar called Moonshine Co-op, and on this tape he actually recorded a meeting with all these little hippie guys and a few women arguing about whether to have a women's night or not. And they finally agreed to, and my band was the first band that got to play there, women's band. So that was kind of funny, and it was really interesting watching that tape, and because a lot of those guys were there last night too, and I'm like,
So what did you play in the band?
I played mandolin and spoons and hand drums.
How did you find Columbus and OSU? Accepting, not accepting, kind of in the middle?
Well, like I said, back then it was more just making yourself visible, and then it was some acceptance and some not. The university, though, was pretty good about, we always had a organization or two on campus that was funded. And then there was also Sue Vassbinder, who was the first gay woman that ran for undergraduate student government. And she was my roommate for a while. And, people would call and make harassing phone calls, and somebody threw a brick through her window one time. But the vote actually was pretty good for something like that, I think.
Did you ever experience any of the sort of things like you said that she experienced as running personally?
Not like verbally, yes.
Right. Maybe you could tell me what your position here is at Stonewall.
I'm a center coordinator. I help set up groups that meet here and work on events and help run the center every day. The day-to-day fun stuff. And it is fun. I like it here. I get to meet lots of people and feel like I'm doing something good for us.
How did you come to be here at Stonewall?
It was purely by accident. Carla, who was then the interim executive director, had already had plans to go to Florida for a couple of weeks, and said, well, why don't you just come in and just watch things, answer the phones, and And she goes, you might like it. And I was like, no, I won't like it. I don't like being in an office. And then I thought, well, it's a couple blocks from my house. It's always been a great organization. I'll try it. And I loved it.
When did
they
you
liked
start?
me also, which is good. So, be 2 years.
Are you a part of any other organizations currently?
I've done stuff with Equality Ohio and HRC.
Okay.
And I think here, one thing, which I know back in the 70s when we were all fighting for equality, and we had Now who didn't like the lesbians being in their group, and we had Act Out, and everybody fought with each other then because everybody thought what they were doing was the way to get things done and changed. And I think, at least for me, the main thing I think we should have learned was that everything we all did helped make change, and that it was all important, and being out in the street, yelling and screaming worked, as well as lobbying the legislature. And hopefully I think that's passed down now, because a lot of the groups work together on stuff. And I was kind of sad to see that Proposition 8, they were blaming, the press was trying to blame the African Americans, and I thought, well, here they go. They're trying to divide us again and make us fight with each other so that nobody gets very far along. And I don't think it's going to work this time. I think people are a little smarter.
Let's hope
so, hopefully.
So what did you do before you came to Stonewall?
I have done remodeling of houses, and I've also, for, I should say 40 years now, done music events and booked women's music, been involved in that in some form or other. We started Women's Music Union back in the early 70s. That was right before the lesbian music circuit started, because there were several of us who played music here, and there was nowhere to play, because the bars didn't want women playing. So like I said, my band was the first one that got to play at the community-owned bar that was supposed to be hip. So we started this Women's Music Union basically to try to provide spaces for us all to play, and then the music circuit started, and we started doing that, and that was kind of that, became more important than getting ourselves places to play. But it kind of all worked out. We did that for over 10 years.
Are you still involved with music?
I am. I do stuff through here. I book entertainment for one of the clubs on High Street.
Which one of the clubs?
East Village.
Okay.
We just had a concert back here a couple weeks ago. So a lot of folks that are traveling through get a hold of me and ask me if I can set up something for them. So it's always what's fed my soul and been my passion. So. But I was never one to be on stage. I always liked it better being the organizer than backstage.
So tell me a little bit about your personal life. Do you have a partner?
I do not right now. I keep myself too busy to have time for that. I have been in some relationships, but right now I feel really good about the different things I'm doing, and I really don't feel like I have time to be in a committed relationship. So I'm happy with where I'm at right now.
That's good. So tell me how you think the lesbian scene, I guess, for lack of a better word, in Columbus has changed since your early years in Columbus through.
Well, it's gotten a lot bigger. Back then, there was such a hunger to be together, and there was only one bar back then, Jack's A Go-Go. And so, we could do a concert, and it didn't matter who it was. There was somebody coming through. It could be Chris Williamson. It could be anyone. And people would come just because they wanted to be around each other and have that experience. And now I think the mainstream artists that have come out, and there's not that need anymore like there was then. I think we were still finding our strength as women then, let alone gay women. And now I think, the women of today are much stronger in a lot of ways, and they don't need that extra support as much as we did then. I find some of the younger lesbians like just totally unaware of how they got to be where they are now, and having any respect for what women went through. And even with voting, I mean, my gosh, that wasn't that many years ago. We weren't even allowed to vote as women. So I just think that's really important to know your history and know who paved the way for you and and to keep doing that so that things do get better and better.
So you talked about there being one club. Were there multiple clubs for men? Were there just one? There
were more dance clubs for men, and some of them, the women were, sometimes we were allowed to go and sometimes we weren't. And if they didn't want us there a particular night, they'd say, oh, well, you're not dressed right. You have to have a dress on tonight, or you have to have this or that. So it got kind of crazy. But, and there was a lot of separation between the gay men and women then. And when the Grapevine opened, it was, the first more like restaurant club. And so the men and women actually got together and they actually could talk to each other and get to know each other. And I really think that was a turning point of them coming together rather than being at the dance clubs and the music so loud nobody talked anyway. Things started changing back, around then. And now we've got 27 gay bar and restaurants, so it's certainly much more accepted now. So I'll tell you some stories about Jack's, because that was, and it just recently closed. It was the longest existing lesbian bar, excuse me, in the country for a long time. But there were some men who would try to come in and harass the women, and there were a few fights and pool sticks flying, and that's something that you don't ever even hear about anymore in the clubs, and especially in the Short North area. It's a very diverse, mixed community that goes into all the places, and very accepting. But yeah, there was more than one occasion where men would come in just to hassle and give you a hard time about it.
Straight men, I'm assuming you're...
Yeah.
Okay. Where was Jack's?
It was on Summit, between Lane and Arcadia, or it was just north of Arcadia.
Okay. Do you know about when it opened?
Let's see. It was the late 60s, early 70s. And it was owned by a straight couple, but somehow it became a lesbian bar, and they loved it. They had a great time, and they ended up selling it to one of their bartenders, a woman who had worked there for years. But it was also where, it was kind of known that's where you could go, and that was really the only place you knew where you could meet people. And so there, you could go there when you were 16. They didn't check IDs back then or care. Nobody, it was where you went. It was the only really choice you had.
Did you have problems with police or crime related to the bar or outside of the bar?
No, I never saw the police come there.
That's good.
They didn't care. Now they did come. There was a bar on 11th. I can't remember what it's called. it had closed by my time, but it was actually where they had a light that would flash when the police were coming, and you would grab the partner of the opposite sex and act like you were dancing with them. So,
Right.
and it all seems so silly now, but we've come a long way in 40 years.
Yeah. So, are you religious?
Not really.
Okay. I understand that you're the founder, I believe, of an organization for young women and music.
The Girlz Rhythm and Rock Camp.
Could you tell me a little bit about that?
I started that. June Millington, who was in Fanny, which was the first women's rock band ever recorded on a major label, was a friend of mine, and she had actually come through Columbus and played several times. And when they moved the Institute for the Musical Arts from California to Northampton, they had a girls' rock and roll camp. So a friend and I drove up, and we just said we're going to come. We took a girl from Cincinnati that wanted to attend, and I said, "Well, just help do whatever and hang out." And it was awesome, and it was like you kind of realized these girls were going to remember this their whole life, whether they did music or not. And it just seemed really important, so I decided I was going to do that when I came back to Columbus, and this will be our 6th year coming up.
Okay. How many girls do you...
We usually have 20 a week in a session. It lasts a week. It's an overnight, and they come. They have to write their own songs. We have instruments and sound system out, and then it ends on the last day with a performance, and it's amazing. And it just seems like every year they get better and better. Even whether it's the same ones coming back or not, they write their songs faster, and they are more talented now. So it's an awesome experience. I wish we could do it every day. If we had a little space, we could have a
Where do
after
you
school. We end up renting a campground to do it.
Okay. And where is that?
We've done in Delaware. The Salvation Army owns Camp Greenwood.
Okay.
And we've used that for 3 of our years. So.
And you do that in the summer? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What sort of age group of girls come to you?
We say 10 to 18, but we've actually had, Rain was 8, I think, the first year she came. One of our counselors, Sheila, brings her daughter, who's 4. We kind of just decided, well, if they're comfortable staying away from home for the week, then it doesn't matter what age they are. And actually, it kind of seems like the younger they are, the better songs they write, the more worldly, more political songs they write. And we have nothing to do with what they write. They sit down and do it. And I mean, we help refine it a little, but they're amazing at the stuff they come up with.
That's awesome.
We've also, the last 3 years, timed it so that the second weekends on Gallery Hop in the Short North, so we've come in and performed that Saturday too, which has been really good for them, because then they're playing in a real place where other bands have played, and it's amazing how they step up, and their performance is always much better than it was in the afternoon at the campsite. So it's fun. And then we try to, like other events and stuff that are going on, there's some of the girls that'll come and perform. And we also do a lending of instruments, like, the first couple years we had to beg, borrow, and every musician I knew, can you borrow your guitar? Can you borrow your drums? And now, since we got a grant from Pearl Jam, actually, We were able to buy our own sound system. And then I've had different women who have donated guitars, and they're like, this is just sitting in my closet. So this year we were able to lend out 3 guitars and 2 drum sets to the girls for the year. So I kind of just, if I knew their parents couldn't really afford to buy them one and they seemed really interested, I let them take it home for the year. So that's been pretty cool.
Have you had any of the girls form bands out of this?
Yeah, there's a couple that have still trying to play together and stuff. But a lot of them more are just on their own.
I guess kind of tell me what the organization means to you a little bit. Like, do you wish you had something like this when you were younger? How do you think something like this could have existed when you were younger?
I don't know. I guess it could have, but it didn't.
Right.
I've had a lot of women say they wish they had something like this when they were young, and that's part of how we would survive. Is they'll sponsor a girl. Mm-hmm. So I say, I wish I had this when I grew up. Here, let me sponsor something, because we end up scholarshiping over half our girls usually. Okay. So we don't turn anybody down because of money. And it also helps us get a really good balance of different backgrounds and nationalities and economic. And so it's always, we've been able to survive so far. So hopefully. But there's been several of them that have popped up in other cities. June's, and then there's Girls Rock Camp in Oregon that's they've been in for 9 years, I think. They're not an overnight camp, they're a day camp. Mm-hmm. And there's been ones in Tennessee, New York, so they seem to be popping up everywhere.
Do you draw girls just from the Columbus area, or you get them from?
We get them from actually I've got girls from Indiana that come, Michigan, all parts of Ohio.
So you said you came out in college. Did you know before then, or?
Yeah, I mean, I can look back and know I had crushes on my adults, but like I said, when I grew up and being out in the country, it was like, no, it wasn't on TV then. Mm-hmm. There was no talk about it, or you might hear the word dyke used, but it was a derogatory, and you weren't quite sure what it meant, but you knew it wasn't anything good. So it wasn't, I think it took till I came here to go, oh, yeah, that's what I am. And I think that's another thing that's changed, is I think it's in some ways easier, even for girls that are out in the country, because there are characters on TV. It is something that's talked about, even if it's negative or positive. It's out there now, and because I think if I had seen that when I was growing up, I would have identified much sooner and realized what was.
Do you identify as either butch or femme, or has that ever been a portion of your identity at all?
I have never identified as either. And I think when I came out, there were several women who identified as butch and femme, and that went to Jack's. Mm-hmm. And because that's what they thought, you had to be one or the other. And so, of course, coming out in the more radical and political sense, we were like, no, you don't have to do it. You can be whatever you want. You can just, so I kind of came into that realm of it. But I think what's interesting now is the whole drag king culture that has popped up in the last few years. And it's almost like they think they're the first ones who've ever done this, and it's like, no, you're not. You're just calling it something a little bit different, but and they're making theater of it and performance of it. But I don't know. They say everything comes around in 30 years or so. So it's interesting to see how stuff comes back in a different form. But it's because I think that's probably one of the largest movements going now, and the younger, even the high school kids who will want to identify as whatever gender terms they use. I think Grace Slick of Jefferson Airplane once said, if the younger generation isn't doing something to freak us out, then something's wrong. And it keeps going. And
tell me a little bit about some past relationships. I'm trying to form a question out of that, and I'm just like, well, it's kind of...
Well, my first true love, I met back then was Diantha, and we were actually in the band together.
What did she play?
She could play everything. She could pick up an instrument she'd never seen and play it in 10 minutes. So we had the band together. That was in the early 70s. We moved out into the country for 2 years, I guess. We broke up, but we're really good friends now. She's in Yellow Springs, and thank goodness for email. It's easy to keep in touch that way.
Yeah, no doubt. Children, have you ever wanted to have children at all?
I have never wanted to physically have them. I'm not into pain like that, but I have been in I was in 2 relationships where my partner had children. And in some senses, I feel like they were the reason I was in them, because I love kids, and I always have. And I was always supposed to be a teacher. But actually, I never finished college because I knew I was too radical and wouldn't keep my mouth shut, and I knew I would never survive as a teacher because they wouldn't put up with it, so I never did get my teaching degree. But I've always loved kids. I've always been good with kids, and but I never wanted to have any. I've always had my nieces and nephews, and like I said, 2 of my partners had children.
You still close with both your siblings?
Yeah. If I get the posters back from all the concerts we did back then, she took them to film them to go along with the panel that we did. But that was something that I kept in my musty basement, was all the old posters from all the concerts and stuff. And I think those need to be tucked away somewhere for generations later to see. And I think, I would just reiterate that I think the most important thing we can learn from the past is that whatever progress we make, it's because everybody's doing different things on different levels, and that we shouldn't fight each other even if we don't agree with the level they're doing it on, that they're all really important and they all help make changes, and that's what's got us where we are today. So
I guess I just thought of a question that I find interesting. As a person that was a part of, women's liberation movement, how do you feel about this move for gay marriage now?
I'm one of those who could care less about whether we get married or not. But and I don't think it was even us that first brought it to the forefront. I think it was a trick that they used, and then we had to back it. But, obviously we should have the same rights. And Keith Oberman did a great piece on well, as late as 1967, 17 states would have recognized Obama's parents as being in a legal marriage. And I'm sure, hopefully not too many years from now, people will look back and laugh and go, oh my God, what do you mean? You're going to have to be civil marriages, not real marriages. And it seems kind of silly, but I still, when I look at how far we have come really in 40 years, it'll happen. It's, now there's a lot more money behind people that are fighting it, and it's scary that some of the violence and things that you hear, but I think it'll happen. Now, an interesting story to me was Katie Ryder, this musician who wasn't legally married, was with her partner, and her partner had benefits through work, and she got this really rare disease. And for 2 years, they fought with the insurance companies on what procedures would be covered and which weren't, and were piling up bills. We were always doing benefits for them to help cover what the insurance didn't cover. And after 2 years, she passed away. And when I asked her partner, Karen, I said, well, how much more money do you owe from what the insurance companies didn't cover? And she goes, well, since we weren't legally married, once she died, it all went away. And she got this look on her face, and she goes, I guess it's a good thing, but it's not right either. And so I thought, you know what, if we told that story to all the straight people, they would probably legalize it so that they wouldn't have to pay those costs.
That's probably true.
But and maybe it'll take stories like that for for them to go, oh yeah, if they were allowed to legally marry, we wouldn't have to pay that extra. But it'll happen someday. I can't imagine things getting worse. Well, I mean, they could always get worse, but not horribly worse. And especially with Obama, I think he offers hope to people, and that the country is going to try, and they're going to give him a hard time, and they're going to throw stuff at him that, I can't even imagine the stuff that they're going to do to try to make it so he can't do things and be recognized as a great president. But I think he will be anyway. I think he's smart enough that he's going to be honest with the people, and we haven't had that for years. So, people can hear times are bad, and that they have to, help out and not do things they used to do and help their neighbors. And it's refreshing to have a leader who's willing to say that and be honest and not play games with us. So I think things will get better.
What do you think the biggest challenge is for the GLBT community right now?
I think our challenge is to not be swayed by the media. And like I said, to not be swayed that it was the African American vote that was the reason Proposition 8 passed. And to stay unified and to work together. And even the rally that existed was done by a kid who'd never done anything political in his life. And, that was really awesome. And, when I stood there and was looking around, there were a lot of people that I knew from 40 years ago who were out there. And they weren't, trying to take over or say a thing, because it's like, people always say, well, I did my part, now you have to take over. And I think that's happening again. I think there was kind of like a generation where people didn't care much, or maybe they didn't feel the need to fight for things. And I think that spark is in people again. And hopefully that'll move things forward faster, and especially when we have the president who's agreeing with us, hopefully.
Right.
And not all talk, but we'll find out.